Bitcoin is crashing again, but something scarier is on the horizon, if you can believe it. And it changes everything. It will make the price seem like a distraction, or perhaps a very big opportunity. Everyone on X is having a full meltdown. Everyone's posting doom charts, and your favorite influencers probably posting about how the price dip is actually a good thing. But while everyone is panicking and talking about the price, something way bigger and way more permanent is happening right under our noses. Apple just rolled out a digital ID system that makes Face ID look like child's play. I'm never gonna hear the end of it from my Android friends.
I got some bad ideas in my head.
And at the same time, governments are sentencing Bitcoin privacy developers to prison for writing code. So here's the real question. What if this dip is actually a distraction from the one attack Bitcoiners can't afford to ignore? The war on your identity, your privacy, and your ability to use Bitcoin freely. And what if Bitcoin at a discount is actually a lifeline that protects you from what comes next? Yes, the price is down, but forget the charts. There's a coordinated push to merge your digital identity with your money, and Bitcoin privacy could be next in the crosshairs.
For anybody who is not truly up on digital IDs and why this is so important, can you explain what digital ID means if we begin to implement them?
Yeah, well, digital ID is really the linchpin to, the sustainable development goals, as well as this mass surveillance paradigm that's being sold to us by oligarchs on the left and the right. It would be your unique identifier for the digital world. The goal is to have it be the way for you to offer your credentials to every service that you access, period. Everything ranging from healthcare to telecommunications, your social media accounts. And as things become increasingly digitally connected, perhaps even your appliances, if they're smart appliances at some point, won't function without you having the proper credentials to show that it's you. So ultimately, if people want to fight against this mass surveillance paradigm and these efforts to usher us into a very dark, I would argue, a technocratic future, the most important thing is to not comply with digital ID, because it's the single most important piece of infrastructure that they need. And they need us to voluntarily consent, because even if they roll it out, but it will fail if people decline to use it.
Everyone's obsessing over red candles, but here's what's actually worth panicking about. Apple just made an announcement so dystopian, Steve Jobs is probably rolling in his grave or trying to crawl out to drag Tim Cook back down with him. Their new digital ID system isn't just a convenience update like previous biometric ID features. It's a conditioning tool, a crossing of the Rubicon moment, which allows it to become the default portal for your entire digital life. We've arrived at the bottom of the slippery slope where a private company takes your biometric data and merges with governments around the world to offer 24/7 surveillance. And they aren't alone in this. Europe pushed digital ID laws through in 2024. The UK has a 2025 proposal tying digital identity to migrant enforcement. Yeah, I don't know who's going to believe that. And the US, as usual, is standing in the corner pretending not to stare while taking very detailed notes. They want your identity, they want your wallet, they want your data, and your behavior, all under the most powerful brand on earth.
Hell no!
Surveillance capitalism used to be about ads, but now it's total visibility. Your face, your history, your network, your purchases, your money. So ask yourself, what happens when digital ID becomes your login for everything from healthcare to the bank to travel to Bitcoin? And that brings us to the part they really don't want you to connect. How this entire digital ID rollout intersects with your right to privately transact decentralized money.
Freedom is dangerous. With freedom, you might say the wrong thing, eat the wrong food, hit your home above 18 degrees Celsius. Yeah, and I don't even really know what Celsius means. But digital ID rescues you from this exhausting burden. No more messy choices, no more private thoughts, just one convenient government-approved digital collar of happiness. Picture this. your medical records, carbon credits, status, meat ration, and even your thoughts seamlessly integrated. No more fumbling with cash. No more messy debates. Just scan your bloody ID and obey. And don't worry. You'll still own things? Well, no. You'll own nothing. But we assure you, you'll be happy. Because we say so. And remember, we know best. Now, let us address the menace undermining your mandatory joy. Bitcoin. With Bitcoin, you could escape negative interest rates. You could bypass our heroic bail-ins. You could transact without our permission. Outrageous. Without our oversight, how can we protect you from yourself? How can we nudge you into correct behavior if we can't freeze your funds? Or at minimum, redirect them into our noble bug burger subsidies? Bitcoin is not money. Bitcoin is disobedience. And disobedient citizens is selfish. Imagine a world free of cash, free of Bitcoin, free of choice. Each month, we airdrop you credits directly to your digital ID. They expire after 30 days, but that's to ensure a vibrant economy and total compliance. Your food choices, travel permissions, even speech allowances, all optimized for your happiness. You think you want freedom, but no, you want convenience. And we promise order is happiness, and happiness is mandatory.
Historically, every time the public is distracted by volatility, governments quietly push the next stage of financial control. Before we talk about why governments are coming after Bitcoin privacy, we need to remind ourselves of how we got here, because this didn't just start with Bitcoin. It started over a century ago. And if you've been a longtime fan of the channel, you recall that in 1913, the Federal Reserve was created, shifting monetary power away from the public and into central authority. Then, in the 1930s, Americans handed over their gold in exchange for government IOUs. And in 1971, those IOUs detached from gold entirely.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
Then came checks, credit cards, online banking, and finally, fully digital payments. Just this week, they stopped minting the penny, and they had the nerve to celebrate.
This is the last one. 3, 2, 1.
What really happened there was the debasement of our currency and the loss of our purchasing power. And with each step, we became more and more addicted to convenience, handing over just a little more control. And with that absolute power came absolute corruption, which crescendoed in the 2008 financial crisis. So, in 2009, the birth of Bitcoin, money you can self-custody without permission, without identity, it didn't just disrupt finance, it reversed a 100-year trend toward totalitarian control. Governments panicked. For the first time, there was hope to give power back to the individual. They can't freeze Bitcoin, they can't inflate it, they can't track it by default, and most importantly, Bitcoin doesn't require ID to transact. So now, despite our First Amendment rights to free speech and our Fourth Amendment right to privacy, the U.S. seems to be skipping legislation entirely by using the judicial branch to prosecute developers for crimes committed by users. And that right there brings us into the moment this battle stopped being theoretical and became very real.
The Department of Justice indicted the creators of an application that helps people spend their Bitcoins anonymously. They're accused of conspiracy to commit money laundering. Why conspiracy to commit as opposed to just money laundering? Because they didn't hold anyone else's money or do anything illegal with it. They provided a privacy tool that may have enabled other people to do illegal things with their Bitcoin, but that's not a crime, just as selling someone a kitchen knife isn't a crime. The case against the creators of Samurai Wallet is an assault on our civil liberties and First Amendment rights. What this tool does is offer what's known as a coin join, a method for anonymizing Bitcoin transactions by mixing them with other transactions, as the project's founder, Kion Rodriguez, explained to Reason in 2022.
I think the best analogy for it is like smelting gold. You take your Bitcoin, you add it into Whirlpool, and Whirlpool smelts it into new pieces that are not associated to the original piece.
Smelting bars of gold would make it harder for the government to track, but if someone eventually uses a piece of that gold for an illegal purchase, should the creator of the smelting furnace go to prison? This is what the government is arguing.
But all technologies have had bad effects. The telephones allowed extortion, death threats, bomb threats, kidnapping cases. Uncontrolled publishing of books could allow satanic books to appear.
Cash is the payment technology used by most criminals, but it also happens to be essential for preserving the financial privacy of law-abiding citizens, as Human Rights Foundation Chief Strategy Officer Alex Gladstein told Reason.
The ATM model, it gives people the option to have freedom money. Yes, the government will know all the ins and outs of what the flows are coming in and out, but they won't know what you do with it when you leave. And that allows us to preserve the privacy of cash, which I think is essential for democratic society.
The government's decision to indict Rodriguez and his partner William Lonergan Hill is also an attack on free speech, because all they did was write open source code and make it widely available.
The Samurai Wallet developers were sentenced to 5 years, not for stealing funds, not for laundering money themselves, but for writing software that protects privacy and could hypothetically enable crime. Not the same thing. And that case with Tornado Cash, Roman Storm's appeal has been denied, although just a day ago, reports came out that he may be retried for his money laundering charges. Ross Ulbricht, life in prison for creating a platform that other people used, and miraculously, he was pardoned by Donald J. Trump after enormous political pressure, but that likely won't be the case for everyone or anyone going forward. So it's not like it's a precedent we can really lean against, because it's not something that's written into law. Also, have these people ever heard of cash? Like, what do they think criminals used before Bitcoin? They're trying to criminalize the means of exchange instead of the people who are committing the crimes themselves. It's ridiculous. So now this begs the question, what happens if the feds come for multisig for suspicion of criminal activity? Will they allege that intent is enough to prosecute and ruin people's lives? Meanwhile, the banks launder billions, and they just pay a fine. It's literally written into their budget. But if you use self-custody in the future, could you one day be treated like a criminal?
Restraint on freedom of expression of software writers is anathema in a free society and a violation of the First Amendment, wrote the economist and entrepreneur Phil Salen in a 1991 essay titled Freedom of Speech in Software.
Encryption can't be controlled, whether or not it's powerful or has impacts on the government, because it's free speech.
In the early 90s, John Gilmore, who was a co-founder of the cypherpunk movement, risked going to jail in his campaign to force the government to acknowledge that regulating encryption violated the First Amendment.
We basically had a community of 1,000 people scattered around who were all trying different ideas on how to get around the government to get encryption to the masses.
What we're afraid of several years from now is the terrorists both hit their encryption button on the telephone, and even though we have access, we can't understand what they're saying on a real-time basis.
The Clinton administration told Congress that Americans have no constitutional right to choose their own method of encryption, and pushed for legislation that would require companies to build in a mechanism for law enforcement agencies to break in.
We're in favor of strong encryption, robust encryption. We just want to make sure we have a trapdoor and a key under some judge's authority where we can get there if somebody's planning a crime.
The cypherpunks looked for ways to undercut the government's case by pointing out the similarities between encryption software and other forms of protected speech. With Phil Zimmerman under federal investigation for making his software available for download outside the US. To prove a point, he convinced MIT Press to mirror his action in the analog world by printing out the PGP source code, adding a binding, and shipping it to European bookstores.
The government knew if they went to court to suppress the publication of a book from a university that they would lose, and they would lose in a hurry. There were people who actually got encryption code tattooed on their bodies and then started asking, can I go to a foreign country? We printed up t-shirts that had encryption code on them and submitted them to the Government Office of Munitions Control. Can we publish this t-shirt? Ultimately, they never answered that query because they realized to say no would be to invite a lawsuit they would lose. And so the best answer was no answer at all.
Talk a little bit more about encryption technology.
No. Thank you. I hesitated even to use the word, but I'm not using it in any more way.
In 1996, the Justice Department announced that it wouldn't pursue criminal charges against Phil Zimmerman, and major court victories came when 2 federal judges found that encryption is protected by the First Amendment.
The crypto wars are still ongoing. What we won in the first round was the right to publish it and the right to put it in mass market software. But what we didn't actually do is deploy it in mass market software. Now, there are major companies building serious encryption into their products. And we're getting a lot of pushback from the government about this.
We're about the rule of law, but we don't want to create spaces that are beyond the reach of the law in the United States, right?
It's not just the reprehensible behavior of sexual predation on children, but myriad additional forms of serious crime enabled by end-to-end encryption.
I'm not optimistic that privacy will prevail in the crypto wars. It's an ongoing struggle.
Let's be honest. This isn't necessarily about stopping crime so much as it is about preserving control. Now, let's take a breather. Because while our governments may be trying to criminalize privacy, Bitcoin miners are out there doing the exact opposite. Securing your freedom. So here's how you can support mining that actually supports you. Would you mine Bitcoin if it were as easy as buying it? Then you should check out Sazmining. It's not hosted mining, it's mining as a service that actually puts Bitcoiners first. You can own a state-of-the-art mining rig, plug into affordable carbon-free energy, and stack Bitcoin just like Satoshi. No middlemen, no markups, and no worries. Saz doesn't tack on extra fees when you sign up, and unlike other companies, there are no rig upcharges or inflated power rates. Their entire business model is based on a clean and simple revenue share. They only earn Bitcoin if you are too. A total alignment of incentives and 100% Bitcoiner values. While some claim simplicity, Sazmining proves it. Let's just say that if you need a compass to find your miners, you're not in the right place. This is how Bitcoin mining should have always been done. Visit sazmining.com or scan the QR code to learn more and start hashing. Now, let's get back to the show.
We're actually seeing the downstream effects of the stablecoin legislation passing in the US, other places in the world now. Like in the UK, they're limiting how many dollar stablecoins, or attempting to limit how many dollar stablecoins a UK citizen can hold. And then we're seeing, mass debanking in Vietnam. I think it was something like 70-something million bank accounts were closed, basically saying, we'll rebank you if you agree to this biometric stuff and, basically implement a digital ID. And I think the reason for that is, when there's a proliferation of US dollar stable coins across the world, and, now there's even avenues for yield to be given to those stable coins, which we're going to see, right, at some point. Why would any foreign national hold anything other than, dollars, hopefully, Bitcoin, if you're into that. But why would you hold a local currency when you can hold dollars, get yield from it, and all you need to do to get to it is have, a smartphone? So I think countries around the world, the euro, the ECB is now putting out comments being like, we're screwed if we let the dollar stable coins take over, because why would you want to stay in the euro when you can get dollars with yield? So we're going to actually see, I think, the rest of the world first implement a lot of restrictions on people via digital ID and, choking these on-ramps to stable coins, because people are going to massively, flight, just incredible capital flight from their local currencies, and they want to keep that money in their country. Otherwise, they're fucked. They don't want you putting their money in US debt or, in tethers. They want to keep you in your local currency. So we're already starting to see the downstream effects, or internationally from the Genius Act as it relates to, like, let's prevent capital flight, because if all the money leaves the country, we're kind of screwed. So it remains to be seen how they'll do it in the U.S., what carrot they'll dangle, whether it's some UBI or some, yield thing or something that gets American citizens to comply with this stuff. But we're already starting to see it as like a defensive maneuver from foreign nations to like prevent capital flight via stablecoins.
So this is why you, the viewer, should care. The more information centralized institutions have on you, the more power they gain to shape your behavior. Not by force, but by subtly creating incentives based on information they gather and building an artificially comfortable world just for you. Free will becomes managed consent. You give them the data, they build the walls. And before long, you're living the soft Truman Show, curated around your identity.
Okay, he's making his turn onto Lancaster Square. Oh my God! He knew he hit balance. Something's wrong. Change frequencies.
And if that beep just blew your eardrums out, imagine how uncomfortable it will be when the powers that be know your every intimate detail. Privacy isn't for people who are hiding things. Privacy is a right for everyone, and people don't want to be manipulated anymore.
If you have a digital ID, then if you look at Australia, for example, now with the digital identity bill that have passed, your identity is revealed to the state for almost any action that you take, especially online actions. You surf the internet, you are identified on the internet. They are able to tell which websites you went to, what did you purchase, how much time you spent online, whatever. Social media, your opinions, you're identified. And so imagine that you're identified and your dissident voice is now known to the government. They can use AI to just really analyze quickly large sums of data and say all the people that talk about whatever permaculture right now, we want to put them segment them into a database, see what they're saying about it, pull out those keywords out of it, and all the people that are looking at permaculture in order to avoid the state control over food. I'm just giving an example off the top of my head.
It's a realistic one.
Let's go after them. They're identified, and then let's give them a quota of their CBDC of how much they can use to buy fertilizers, for example, because they're going to grow their own food, and we don't want them to do that. We want them to buy the industrial food in the supermarket because we don't want to hurt the economy, right? They have reasons for everything. I'm just giving there are so many examples you can make up.
So while everyone is arguing whether Bitcoin is going to 80K or 150K first, the real battleground isn't on the chart. It's actually on your right to use Bitcoin without permission. Volatility is temporary. Surveillance is permanent. And if you understand that, then Bitcoin at a discount isn't a threat. It's actually a tremendous opportunity to opt out before digital ID becomes the default for everything, including your money. Because here's the truth. Bitcoin exposes how much the current system depends on total monetary control. And that's why they're acting so desperate. They're showing you the world they want. And the question is, are you going to help them build it? Or are you going to opt out and join the peaceful revolution? Let me know in the comments.
Surveillance is the license given to the people who are on the top of that to control our lives. They will commit crimes. They will commit the worst of crimes, what I call mega crimes. And I know Britain doesn't use the metric system, so mega is the prefix we use for millions. A mega crime is one where, for example, you foreclose on 1 million homeowners and don't go to jail. That's a mega crime. We're doing surveillance and analytics to catch a petty drug dealer who's selling pot for Bitcoin. Who's doing surveillance and analytics on Lockheed Martin? Who's doing surveillance and analytics on the money laundering banks? Nobody. Do you know why? None of them ever go to jail. The regulators are completely captured, and the very system of controlling finance from above by having levers of power over the lives of millions of people, billions of people, of having the audacity to cut off entire countries and say, well, they're under sanctions. They're not privileged enough, they're not people enough to gain financial services. Guess who that attracts? If you build levers of power like that, the very worst sociopaths in our society are attracted like flies to shit to grab hold of those levers of power and destroy all of your freedoms as quickly as they can. We are building societies in which one bad election is the last election. And if you don't believe me, look at what's happened in Turkey, what's happened in Russia, what's happened in Venezuela, what happens every day to billions of people around the world. Let me end on a positive note, because you're probably a bit freaked out by all of this. You should be. This is serious stuff. Open, borderless, public, transparent, neutral, censorship-resistant, strictly private cryptocurrencies exist. They will not be regulated. They cannot be regulated, not by committees, because they're regulated by mathematics. They're regulated by algorithms. They provide certainty of transaction. They provide programmable customer protection. They provide reputation management. They provide access without identity. They give billions of people, eventually, not just a bank account in their pocket, but a bank in their pocket. They democratize the function of banking and turn it into an app that everyone can access without vetting, because they've already pre-vetted. They have agreed to download the software that follows the rules of consensus, and that is the only vetting required in these systems. But we shouldn't allow that. We did. But we can't have people make anonymous transactions. They will. But we must regulate this. You can't. And you won't. Because 6 billion people need this. And you have neither the moral authority, nor, more importantly, the practical capability to stand in their way, or even to stand in the way of what is going to be the greatest revolution in financial services in 3 centuries: universal access to basic finance.
Before we wrap up the show, let's bring this home with a special message from our friends at Ledn. If you're stacking sats, you need Bitcoin-backed services you can trust. That's why we roll with Ledn, the global leader in Bitcoin-backed lending. Ledn has issued over $9 billion in loans since 2018 and a perfect record of protecting client assets. Why is a Ledn loan different? Collateral is not lent out to generate interest. No credit checks, funds in 24 hours, no monthly payments, repay whenever you want, 0 penalties. And their proof of reserves, verified every 6 months, keeps them transparent. Ledn lets you unlock liquidity without selling. Sign up through Simply Bitcoin for 25 basis points off your first loan. Scan the QR code or click the link in the show notes below to get your discount today. Now, let's wrap up the show. So, be honest with me. Are people distracted by the price and not focused enough on the imminent attack on privacy happening right now? Because yes, the price matters, but does it really matter if you're not able to transact in the way that Satoshi intended? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all. Anyway, that's our show for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't already, please hit the like and subscribe and share the show with your friends. I'm your host, Sophie, and as always, stack, slay, and stay bullish, baby.